Why? Okay, we have Srivarshini who asks, how did they handle the partition of India? Which I think is a very interesting question to answer. I'm guessing like, how did the government, how did the leaders handle the partition of India?
I mean, it was difficult. The partition was an extremely traumatic event, and the fact that it happened at all was a source of grief to a lot of people. And I think in many ways it's there's actually a few letters that I read. There were a few letters from Nehru, from Vallabhbhai Patel, talking about the refugee crisis and the kind of violence that was taking place. And it's I think they are really worth reading, because you realize that being in power is one thing. You're the prime minister, you're the home minister, you know what your powers are. But when you're confronted by something that is so tragic, and you see people who have lost everything or lost family members who have had to leave their homes, the only homes that they've ever known, I think even for them, it was incredibly painful to have to deal with these things. So I would say, yeah, they dealt with partition with a lot of sadness, with a lot of anger, with a lot of anxiety. And I think it's all of these letters are publicly available. They're all online. So if you ever get the chance, just Google partition letter Nehru Vallabhbhai Patel and you'll find them. And they're really worth reading to get into the minds of people who were in charge when this horrible thing happened.
Nakshatra is asking how many people are mentioned in the book. I know the book says 75, but is there like an extra sneaky number inside that you get to learn about, like a bonus few?
That's a good question, because I actually started the book thinking about 150 people. And then my publisher said, you can't put 150 people in the book. That's too many people, because that'll take too many pages. And so we eventually agreed on 75, because it fit in nicely with the fact that it's the 75th anniversary of India's independence. But I did sneak in a section at the end called Other Incredible Indians, which just has little portraits and little tidbits of information about these people. But these were also very interesting people who did really path-breaking and very different things. So that's more like, take a look at that section, read about them. Maybe you'll be inspired to find out more about these people's lives.
Yeah. We're going to take one personal question, because this person has sent this question many times, and people want to know. They want to know about you. Who was your role model while writing this? And I will add my bonus question in here, which is, why do you love history?
Role model. I mean, I think every writer I have read is probably some kind of role model. And this is true of anybody who writes and reads. Like when you read, you are invariably influenced by the people that you read, and you kind of imbibe the things that you like. You like the way someone writes sentences, you like the way someone talks about history, you try to do those things. So I think for me, a lot of the different history writers I've read ended up being subconsciously my role models. As for why I like history, and I'm sure people in the audience do this too, but I love fantasy novels. I've always loved them. I've read them from the time I was a kid. I loved The Lord of the Rings. I loved Harry Potter. I loved these long stories set in a completely different world, and you have to learn about the rules of that world. You know, you have to learn who has magical powers and who doesn't, what the laws are, what the history of that world is. And that's where, weirdly enough, I think my love of history began, because the past can also seem very much like a different world. People ate different things, they wore different clothes, they spoke different languages. It can very easily be thought of as a different world. And for me, but the other thing is, people in the past also did very recognizable things. You know, they also like to read, they like to draw, they preferred roti to rice. You can find out these little human details about people. And so I like finding that in the past. You can learn about kings and battles, all of those things I love. I love thinking about elephants fighting each other, and, you know, cannons and bows and arrows and things like that, people fighting big battles. I like thinking about huge palaces that people live in. But it's also fun to think about what, did they have bedtime stories? Did they drink coffee? Did they have, like, you can think about these questions. And I think that's what I love about history, that you can think about the past as a different world, but also find so much in there that's similar to us. So it's kind of like trying to understand what it means to be human, what it means to be alive, what do we care about. So I think I love history because it tells me so much about people.
That was a great answer. And I especially love that, especially because we are talking to kids, and often what schools end up doing is history becomes a little dry in school sometimes, where you kind of have to just remember some dates to answer a few questions. But when you're able to think of history as storytelling, the same way a fantasy novel, same way Harry Potter storytelling, and there's a history to it. You think of our own history as a story, it becomes all the more interesting. So my question for you is, if you had to write a full-length story about anybody in the book, because this book has so many fascinating people, right? Like, who is that one person that you would write, you would want to write more about? And I feel like maybe you can tell all of us a little bit more about, because I feel like it'll be nice to leave this session knowing one interesting person.
That's a really good question. I think you could easily write a novel about every single person in this book. I think one thing that I realized in researching this book is, often in textbooks, you don't really get a sense of who the person is. You'll know where they went to school. You will know what they studied. You might know who their parents were. But mainly it focuses on what were their achievements, what policies did they put into play, how did they contribute to India. You will just put it in 5 points and that's it. But you don't know who they are as people. And the most fun thing about reading for this book was finding out who these people were. And so, to give you an example, I found out that VP Menon, who was Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel's right-hand man, who was involved in bringing the princely states and convincing them to be part of independent India, he ran away from school when he was 13 years old because the headmaster had chastised him for bad behavior or attendance, I think. And he was so angry that he burned his school down, and then he ran away. And he ended up going to the Kolar gold fields where gold was being mined in Karnataka, and he took a job at 13 and then he worked his way up. So imagine, that's such a great story. So there are people
disclaimer, do not do this at home, kids.
No, do not. That was a different time. But you really think about, you can get to learn about people as people who had dreams, who had parents who allowed them or didn't allow them to do things, and they were angry or they were happy about it. You really think about people as human beings, and I think that helps. So to get to your question, the person I think I would most love to either write a book about, or even if somebody else were to write it, I would definitely read it, would be Indira Gandhi. Because she was born in 1917. So, and India, of course, got independence in 1947. So the first 30 years of her life, she spent in a house where everyone from her grandparents to her cousins were part of the independence movement. And at the age of 4, she was actually sitting on her grandfather's lap when Motilal Nehru was being tried by a British court for having organized a hartal. And he had this 4-year-old Indira on his lap, kind of. Can you imagine what it must have been like to be a 4-year-old sitting in court on your grandfather's lap as he's being tried? And it just gets crazier from there. So she had a very close relationship with her father, but they also had conflict because she didn't always agree with him. She lost her mother when she was quite young. She was quite lonely growing up because everybody was very busy being part of the movement. And then, of course, she grew up and people really didn't, she was quite quiet. She was not perhaps like her father, like an outgoing person. So people really underestimated her. And then when she finally, when Nehru died and she, they were sort of talking about who could take over, and nobody ever thought of Indira as being very important, and she really proved everybody wrong. She was first brought into power by a group of people who thought, as a girl, as someone who's not seemed very clever or very interesting, we can push her around. And she really said, no, you can't push me around. So I think her life is it's tragic, but it's dramatic, and she's a very interesting person to think about.
Yeah.
So I definitely think she would be great fun to write a novel about.
We're almost out of time. So I'm going to ask one last question, and then maybe we can go into like the specifics of like, how big is the book? Where can you buy the book, etc., etc. Because I think there's been a few questions about that. So my last question to you would be, since it's going to be Independence Day soon, 15th August is around the corner. What is the one thing that you would like everybody who's sort of attending, who's listening to you talk about the book? What's the one thing you think they should take away from this book, especially in light of Independence Day and just the world that we live in now?
I think that one thing I was very careful to do with this book is to make sure that that there's a selection of people who are from all over India, from the north, south, east, west, all over. And also that I wanted there to be a good balance between upper caste and non-upper caste people. I wanted there to be a balance between men and women. And I just think that the one thing I would love for people to take away from this book is that there's no one way to be a good citizen. There's no one way to be Indian. We've always been hugely diverse. People talk differently, eat differently, dress differently, believe in different things. But the thing that unites everybody is this idea of India, of a country where people are equal, where you have equal rights under the law, where you are in a democracy and you have certain freedoms. And this idea of India that unites so many different people, I would love for that to be the key takeaway, that we've always been diverse, we've always had different opinions, but we've been brought together by a dream, very simply.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And I think that answers Aryan's question as well, who's asked, why do you think we should read this book? And I feel like this is exactly why anybody should read this book, for its diversity, for all of these voices that you've brought together, for all of these dreams that you sort of put down on paper. And I think that's a really powerful motivator to read this book, which I will ask Ashwita to wave around again. Called Incredible Indians. That was Ashwita Jaikumar. Where can we find this book, Ashwita?
You should be able to find it in bookstores and online on Amazon and other online retailers.
And somebody's asked, how many pages does it have? So I feel like that's an important motivator.
It's about 124 pages, 128 pages. Yeah.
That's all. Easy peasy.
Yeah.
124 pages.
Short, sweet.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's it. That's our time for today. If we missed answering any of your questions, I'm so sorry. We had over 50, 60 questions. And okay, there's somebody who's typed in all caps and I feel like they're yelling at me. From where did you get the idea to write this book?
Oh,
so maybe we can end at that.
Sure. The idea, whenever people ask me this question, I feel like I have a very wishy-washy answer, because it's not like, it's not like in the cartoons where you have a light bulb go off and you just have an idea. It's like with any book, a lot of people work together. The author always gets a lot of focus, but you have publishers, you have editors, you have typesetters, you have proofreaders. A whole team goes into making a book. It's never just one person. All the author does is create the words. Everybody else contributes in hugely important ways. So the idea for this book actually came out of a conversation with the publisher about modern Indian history, and what we could do. How can we tell it in an interesting way? Which kinds of people can we focus on? So over the course of months and months, you start with that base idea, and then you build on it. You say, oh, maybe we can include writers, maybe we can include environmentalists, maybe we can include soldiers. How do we cover all these different things? So yeah, there's a lot of back and forth. You can get into big arguments with your editor. So yeah, any book, it's the result of a long process.
Yeah. Okay. I think we will end at that question then. I'm not going to take any more yelly questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending this session. It's been absolutely fun. Andrea has put the link to the excerpt of the book. So you can read a bit about the book there. You can buy the book once you've read that excerpt, and you'll love the excerpt, of course, because Ashita is a fantastic writer. And you can buy the book everywhere that you buy books generally. And this was a lot of fun. Thank you, Ashita.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks. Bye, guys.